we face social and economic peril as well as environmental peril. And the only way we're going to deal with that is to find ways to moderate our power.
Hi, Vicki Robin here, host of What Could Possibly Go Right, a project of the Post-Carbon Institute, where we interview cultural scouts, people who see far and serve the common good, asking each one of them our core question: with all that seems to be going wrong, what could possibly go right? And our guest today is the wonderful and dear old friend, Richard Heinberg. He is the author of 13 books, the first of which, The Parties Over, Oil, War, and the Fate of Industrial Societies, was my inspiration in 2004 when I read it to turn my attention toward relocalization as a strategy for claiming a better future. And eventually I joined him on the board of the Post-Carbon Institute, where he is a senior fellow in residence and is regarded as one of the world's foremost advocates for the shift away from our current reliance on fossil fuels. He has authored scores of essays and articles that have appeared in multiple journals and on many websites, and has delivered hundreds of lectures on energy and climate issues to audiences in 14 countries, addressing policymakers at many levels, from local and city council members to the European Parliament. He has been quoted and interviewed countless times and has appeared in many films and television documentaries. He remains, through all of this, a truth teller, a sweet, humble, and honest man, and delivers his message of our trajectory towards civilizational collapse in a good spirit and directly. He's a treasure for all of us who want to see more clearly and act more courageously and serve the common good. So here's my interview with Richard. So welcome, Richard, to What Could Possibly Go Right. In 2020, I brought that question to cultural scouts to help us see through the confusion of the rolling crises into what little green shoots might be sprouting that we could cooperate with. So here we are in 2021, and I feel like, we're just emerging from the Category 5 storm of a year and entering a time of naming and claiming the new normal. It's sort of an opening again, even though the pandemic still rages, and of course we're now facing into the very bigger headwinds of the climate disruptions. But it's an opening again to choose a different future. And so I'm asking my guests to tell us what possibilities are already present that we might now energize. And your book names and claims a bold possibility in the realm, not of whiz bang tech or a new Green Deal, but something catching hold in collective self-awareness. In a way, it feels like the 60s have grown up, 50 years of seeing the problems and developing prototypes, and then a year of revelations that we really can't keep going the way we're going. And so here we are, and over to you, Richard. What could possibly go right?
Well, it's great to be speaking with you, Vicki, first of all, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for doing this wonderful podcast series. Well, everything I say is going to be based on my new book, which will look something like this. This isn't the actual book, but
yay!
It's kind of what the book will look like. Power, Limits, and Prospects for Human Survival is the title, and it'll actually be out in September. And it's kind of the capstone on my career as an author. It's a big book. It's like 400 pages. I've been working on it for years. And it's kind of the whole enchilada. And people warned me not to write a book like this. This kind of big picture book, there's no market for it anymore. And you should write something on a very specific problem, and what are the specific solutions to that specific problem. And that's kind of not where I am right now. And I said, the heck with it, full speed ahead, damn the torpedoes. And here we are. So the book is about power, which is a very familiar word. We all use the word all the time, and very few of us, I think, really stop to think what it actually means. How do you even define power? Physicists define power very simply and clearly as the rate of energy transfer. So because that's a clear definition and it's measurable, I started with that and looked at how power evolved, starting with the very first cells 4 billion years ago and their processes of energy transfer. And through the evolution of life, another definition of power is the ability to do something. So what do we do with energy? We do stuff. Energy is what enables us to do stuff. And so the ability to move, to digest, to reproduce, to deceive, to communicate, to organize socially, all of these abilities were developed by organisms long before humans came along. And actually, my compulsion in writing the book was to answer 3 very specific questions. One, how has our species, just one out of millions, come to dominate the whole biosphere? Second, how and why have we come to oppress one another in so many ways and to such degrees that are, have very few parallels in the rest of nature? And the third question, of course, is, can we change our relationship with power somehow to avoid what could otherwise be a pretty bleak future? And of course, looking at the evolution of power, it's very clear that there were specific turning points where everything changed. And the origin of life, human beings, and the acquisition of language and tool making and so on. Then grain agriculture and the origin of the first states, which had full-time division of labor, and slavery and extreme division of labor between women and men, and all that entailed, and so on. And then most recently, the advent of fossil fuels. And from a measurable standpoint, in terms of the amount of energy used per person, the number of people on the planet, just about anything that you can measure, this last one that's just happened in the last couple of 100 years, the adoption of fossil fuels, has been more consequential than anything that's happened up to this time. I mean, you could probably go back in biological evolution to the origin of cyanobacteria or something like that and, make a case. But certainly since the origin of human beings, there hasn't been anything that has affected our species and our environment as much as the adoption of fossil fuels. So we are familiar with the benefits of fossil fuels. They enable us to travel cheaply and communicate over long distances quickly, and all this stuff that we enjoy now. But the costs are enormous, and it's not just climate change, resource depletion, overpopulation, crowding out other species, environmental pollution of various kinds, much of the worst of which is from microplastics, which are made from fossil fuels, and other kinds of chemicals produced by fossil fuels when we burn them or extract them. So it's hard to overstate the level of peril that faces us this century as a result of the accumulating consequences of our reliance on fossil fuels. So your question, what could possibly go right? Well, it's going to have to come, and this is really the core message of the book, it's going to have to come from a change in our relationship with power. Fossil fuels have given us more power than anything before. And some of us have enjoyed a lot more power than the rest of us. The scale of inequality among human beings, economic inequality, has grown dramatically, especially in the last few decades, because we're producing so much wealth. And that wealth is ultimately coming from nature, but then it gets processed through the human social pyramid and ends up mostly with the folks at the top of that pyramid. So we face social and economic peril as well as environmental peril. And the only way we're going to deal with that is to find ways to moderate our power. And there are a lot of people out there who are saying, oh, no, we can't do that. It's impossible. Because, we human beings are power hogs, and we enjoy all this power, and we do such great things with it. And that's what makes us human. So we just have to find ways of using our power more responsibly while we keep getting more and more of it. We'll build solar panels and wind turbines, but economic growth will proceed. We'll still continue to grow our population and everything. I'm sorry, but that's not a solution. We have to change our relationship with power itself. And part of the book is a description of how that actually happens in nature. It's not something we can't do. Human beings have done it from time immemorial. Native cultures, indigenous cultures had ways of conserving resources and sharing resources and preventing some people from getting a lot more powerful than others. And a lot of those self limits on power fell away over the course of history as we developed grain agriculture and so on. And especially once we got to fossil fuels, because with fossil fuels, it's like, limits? What limits? Limits to soil productivity. Well, just throw some energy at it. Limits to some natural resource. Well, just throw more energy at it and we'll dig deeper and find lower grade ores and just spend more energy in processing them and transporting them. We can solve all human problems because we have so much cheap energy. Well, guess what? If energy isn't cheap and abundant in the future, and I think it won't be, that's not going to work anymore. So again, we have to change our relationship with power. We have to relearn the lessons of power self-limitation that indigenous cultures and other species and ecosystems have spent thousands of years, and in some cases, millions or billions of years in developing. And if we do so, this is I'm getting now to the very end of the book. If we do that, we could find other things to do with our outsized human abilities of language and tool use that would actually make us a lot more happy and give us much more interesting lives. Because power isn't just about agglomerating, more resources and lording it over everybody else. Nature uses power in so many instances to create beauty. Nature is intentionally beautiful. You go outside and you look at the flowers and beautifully colored birds and listen to them singing. Well, they're trying to be as beautiful as they possibly can because that's their strategy for reproduction and survival. And we human beings have that bug too. We are amazing aesthetic creatures. Almost everything around us is designed and made to be as pleasurable as possible and so on. We're really good at that. Well, guess what? We could get even better. And especially if we didn't indulge in aesthetic decadence, which is my term for artistic creation that's specifically for commercial purposes.
Boy,
there's more about that in the book too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I wonder about so many things of what you're saying. Okay, so I'm just gonna like popcorn some topics that sort of are floating around what you said. Okay.
Great.
So number one, even before we found fossil fuel, we found money.
Right.
We found a debt-based money system that we could go into debt to enable ourselves to exploit more. And then the productivity of what we've exploited, we would pay off the debt. So we have a fossil fuel system But we also have this money system, and maybe it's the same thing. Maybe it's money is a sort of source of power that we discovered that was like completely intoxicating. The debt as an intoxication. Like, I don't have to have the money, I'll just go do it, you know? The future will take care of it. So it's there's a piece of that. Then there's another piece of religion, you know, and I had the privilege, like over 20 years ago, of being in a delegation that was with the Dalai Lama, and for 4 days. And the last day, I asked him a bold question, was saying, you know, we wonder about why the Germans didn't do something. They saw the trains going by and they probably knew at some level, but they didn't do anything. So I said, what are the trains that are going by now? You know, and I thought it was going to be something about climate. You know, I thought it was going to be something else. He said, it's the loss of spirituality. And so in a way, the word religion holds, like, whether it's the golden rule or the social cohesion or our obligations to one another, it's something about, so there's an element here, it's an element of beauty you're talking about, but there's also an element of human bonding. You know, it's like, it's like consumerism has broken all the bonds, you know, it's like we're just monads. And of course, the pandemic has potentiated separation. Here we are on Zoom. So I mean, there's so many, the brilliance of what you've done is you've created a central column that allows us to ask ancillary questions. So, and then the third thing, the first one was about money. The second one was about love and religion. And then the third thing is more about, you know, leverage points. Where do you see right now, like if we were to like be able to like jump on something that would spring this vision that you have into the public sphere, where are the leverage points right now that people could act on? Could energize, could cooperate with? So 3.
Right. Oh, there's so much I could say about the 3 questions you just asked. Money, first of all, I'm going to make this as brief as possible. Economists tell us that money is a neutral medium of exchange, and that's crap. Money is storable, transferable social power. We all know that intuitively. It's a fact of our lives. So we have to start treating it that way. And that means if we're going to limit power for the survival of society and nature, that means we have to start thinking about limits on money and debt and the use of money and debt and demonetizing society in various concrete ways. Enough about that now. There's a lot on that subject.
There's a huge amount about that.
Then religion. Yeah, religion has served very, very different purposes in human societies over the millennia. As with the origin of empires, roughly 3,000 years ago, religion became a moralizing force in human society. It hadn't served that purpose before. It wasn't in shamanic cultures, you know, hunter-gatherer cultures. It wasn't about morality. It was about, you know, reconnecting with the spirit world and the left and right hemispheres of the brain and contacting the powers of nature and all that stuff. Morals, nothing. But with the advent of empires, suddenly, you know, if you could implant a moral watcher in everybody's head, then that created the kind of cooperation that you needed with these huge far-flung societies with people speaking different languages and coming from different cultural backgrounds and so on. And that promoted trade, because if you knew if the person you're trading with worships the same moralizing big God, and you can be sure of that because they have to do costly personal public professions of faith by going to church and tithing and doing all these things, then you know you can trust them in a business deal. Wow, So it's religion suddenly served a new function. I think it's going to have to mutate again in our time so that it reconnects us with community and nature in a way that it's currently failing to do. I don't want to give away religion altogether, because it's part of who we are. Spirituality is part of who we are. And in fact, I think it could play an enormous role in future human cultures in, again, giving us things to do that actually enhance life rather than dividing it up and turning it into, tokens of power. What was the third question?
Right. I'll tell you the third question in a second, but I think that for me, religion as an institution is an institution of control in empires. Yeah. Right. But there is also a religious sentiment. There is also that, and I think it's what do you call it? Interiority, whether you call it affection or bonding. There's something in humans that is awakened in smaller scale societies where we have a debt of love to one another, maybe the family. But anyway, I just think that there's a lot more to it than systems of control, and it's that interior dimension that people are accessing through meditation that may be an ally for us. So I just wanted to poke that in, but I also want to. The third question is allyship. Really, what can we ally ourselves with right now? Where are the promising levers that people may or may not recognize, where we could go like, okay, fine, here we are, we're 2021. What could possibly go right? Show me where I can step in your framework.
Well, first of all, applying this understanding and wisdom about self-limitation of power, applying that in our own lives and doing so in a way that enhances our experience of life. But second, more in a political sense, I think it's really important right now that all of us who understand that power has gotten out of bounds, whether it's the social power of great wealth or the power of nuclear weapons to destroy the world, or the power of fossil fuel companies, or the power of humanity to overwhelm other species. We each have different concerns and different levels of concern about the way we see the world going wrong and coming apart. This needs to be an anti-collapse coalition. All of these folks need to be appreciating one another's perspectives and working together. Otherwise, I don't think there's much chance. If each of these interest groups is just pursuing its own, well, this is what's really important. No, you got it all wrong. It's not about Black Lives Matter. It's really about saving the whales, or vice versa. And I'm afraid we're not going to accomplish much.
Yeah, we're gonna have to walk and chew gum and play ukulele.
Yeah.
Or violin. Another thing that occurs to me is people sometimes put this in the framework of patriarchy, that a post-patriarchal society. Now, it may not that's the right little tom-tom, but the vision beyond that is partnership, that we create a partnership society, and there's roadmaps for partnership. There's roadmaps like intersectionality, that big word, intersectionality, which is I've never bonded with, but it says look, we're all of these different issues, we're all sort of dealing with this one big thing, which Richard has now labeled how power functions running through the living systems of the planet. Regeneration is another word. I mean, there's what you're saying is that we need to start to recognize that, post-patriarchal partnership societies is, solidarity, regeneration, that somehow or another we need to start creating a language that we need to be able to almost speak into being this possibility of another purpose for humans. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it all fundamentally comes down to power and how we understand power. For the last 5,000 years, we've been living under systems of vertical power, which is where a few people get to tell other people what to do by way of threats and bribes.
Exactly.
And that bribe can be a paycheck. The threat can be laws. It can be, on and on. It's our whole social fabric is woven of various forms of vertical social power. It wasn't always this way. Pre-agricultural societies are generally characterized more by horizontal power. That's where the basic message is we can all do this together. And there are some forms of authority, but they're situational authority based on demonstrated skill in a particular area. If somebody knows a lot about herbalism, then if somebody else is sick, you're going to go to the person who knows about herbalism to ask you're not going to, just try to come up with something yourself because, well, hey, I should know as much as them because I'm, no, it's just common sense. And that's basically how society operated, was through this kind of common sense trust and partnership that you were just talking about. And we got to get back to that. But the only way we're going to is to address the forms of power that are currently out of whack in society. And so we got to whack them back in.
We got to whack them back. We got to use power to it's a ginormous project.
Yeah,
this sort of turning of the wheel. It's a ginormous project.
One of the chapter subtitles in the book is Fighting Power with Power. So it's how do we use power responsibly in order to overcome some of these unhealthy systems of power that have gotten out of control.
And actually, if you want to talk about hope, one of the hopeful things is that there's so many bottom-up initiatives, whether you call them grassroots or social businesses, or there's so much bubbling up from the grassroots of people, of ways to address power, whether it's the Sunrise Movement or the Movement Voter Project, or Black Lives Matter. There's so much organizing in the face of recognizing the danger of the dominator. There's so much organizing going on bottom up,
right?
And perhaps that's a pool of power that somebody listening to this can go like, I can step into any one of these grassroots movements, and as part of my participation in the large pool of exercising of citizen power.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to let the picture, trying to let the picture.
And as you do that, keep your mind open to how that route to power sharing or power self-limiting can be related to what other people are doing too, because that,
totally
joining of hands, that's going to be
not competition, for scarce resources, for scarce power called money from. But so the one final question, and I know every question is a final one. So you and I have talked a lot over the years about relocalization, and that is there a scale at which you think societies can remain, responsible to one another and to limits, and beyond that scale, is scale something that you investigate?
Yeah, and partly that's an open question. I mean, right now, it appears that so many of our questions can only be so many of our problems can only be solved at the global level by, governments working together, climate change, elimination of pollution, all these things, war crimes. But as you say, a global superorganism, which is what humanity has become, may not be able to persist as we self-limit power and as the amount of energy that's available to us declines and diminishes over the next few decades. So I'm a little bit on the fence. Part of me, maybe a little more idealistic, would love to see this superorganism, which currently is like a bacteria. It just wants to grow. It just wants more. Maybe that superorganism could mature through a collective awareness of limits. Maybe, or maybe it's that this superorganism turns out to be just a very temporary social phenomenon, and we evolve past it. I don't have a hard and fast answer to that.
It's an epiphenomenon of the level of power that we've been able to accumulate to our species.
Right.
It's sort of like a golem or something, and so as that superorganism is de-energized, as less power flows through because there's less resource to keep fueling the fire, then there will be this retribalization, or there will be these smaller scale human settlements, and who knows. So it's an exciting time to be alive, right, Rich?
Sure is.
I mean, really, the stakes are high,
We get to reinvent everything.
We do, at every...
Because we have to.
Because we have to, at every level of scale, from breakfast to, the United Nations. So no, it's not like no rest for the weary. It's a different thing. No lack of fun things to do for somebody who wants to contribute.
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this heavy lift that you've done for all of us, providing a framework of understanding that we can all see ourselves in and through, and help us to understand our dilemma, and if not our solutions, at least our directions.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vicki. Thanks for all you do. And it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise, Richard. Okay, take care. Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so that this hopeful message can get out to more people. Check out Post-Carbon Institute's Resilience website for show notes and for more guest information. Join us on Patreon and become a financial supporter of the show, and for exclusive content and special online events. Thanks also to Asher Miller, Amy Burringrud, and Clara Winter of Post-Carbon Institute, plus production assistant Michelle Wigg from frugalityandfreedom.com.